Time to talk Sooners football here at the Voice of College Football, OU. Appreciate it, everyone being here. You know the drill. Leave those comments and questions in the live chat. We will get to them this hour of Oklahoma football talk right here at the Voice of College Football. We come your way every Wednesday. It's 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 where it counts there in Oklahoma. So pull up a chair and settle in. Don't forget to hit the like button. Don't forget to let people know that we're here talking Oklahoma football every Wednesday with, of course, this guy who's made it happen now 57 consecutive weeks. We got Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. Jason.
Hey, how's it going, Mark? Yeah,
good.
It's kind of it's weird, it's still kind of spring, so to speak, but it jumped. Last week we had a lot of rain and a little bit colder weather in the Oklahoma area, and then this week it has just jumped full board into summer. Like we're in the 90s already, so it's the beginning of the dog days of summer in Oklahoma I think are upon us. But good to talk football as always.
Yes. Well, I got to say that spring's here in Connecticut, so that's a good thing. It did not make the jump. It is settled into the low to mid 70s, so it's been rather pleasant here for quite a few days with blue skies. So that's been nice. I can do without the 90s. I would rather take the 90s over the 20s or 30s, but I don't need that leap. It would be great just to settle in there for some springtime weather. But yeah, Oklahoma making some moves in the transfer portal. The latest rankings we see is number 4 in the transfer portal rankings, which in some instances, especially for these coaches that have made a transition from one program to another, are nearly as important as the recruiting rankings. And of course, the immediacy of the situation. Of course, backup quarterback, Jason, has been a topic that we've discussed in recent weeks and been thrown out there quite often in the live chat. And Oklahoma's made its move and gone out to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. There's been some rumors, and we talked about this a little bit with Emory Jones, and then even Jerry Bohannon a little bit on the Baylor side, and obviously they have picked their destinations at Arizona State and South Florida, respectively. So yeah, kind of interesting. Davis Beville came in over the weekend, as we were talking a little bit off camera here, Mark. It was a really quick, I think, decision. So he was in town over the weekend, was in here a little bit Friday and Saturday, and I believe on Sunday, or if not Sunday, early Monday, made that commitment to Oklahoma. So as you mentioned, we talked about this a lot. It was very clear in the spring game. I mean, even leading up to the spring game, all the reports that I'd seen that Oklahoma was maybe not in dire straits, but in a little bit of trouble if Gabriel was to go down. So Beville gives you a little bit of somewhere in between the two, right? When you look at, he's a guy certainly not as seasoned as a Dylan Gabriel, but certainly has a lot of, well, maybe not a lot, but does have some FBS. Had some opportunities to play. More specifically, last year in the Peach Bowl, came in. For Pickett that opted out in that game, led Pittsburgh to a victory, 14 out of 18, 149 yards, a touchdown and an interception in that game. And I think a lot of the things that people will like is his measurables, 6'6", 235. So he is the prototypical pro-style quarterback that you would see of Oklahoma. And I don't think Oklahoma, gosh, I'm trying to remember, Mark, if Oklahoma has ever had a quarterback on the roster at that height. They've had the great quarterback play for whether it's Jalen Hurts or Kyler Murray or Baker Mayfield, or even going back Sam Bradford, Jason White, Josh Heupel, all of these guys, but they've never had a guy with kind of the measurables of Davis Beville. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of goes through the process. When you look at both of those guys, Mark, Dylan Gabriel, and Davis Beville, both of those guys essentially, for all intents and purposes, are sophomores and have three years of eligibility left. Right, when you look at when you look at Gabriel, he's played a little bit more, but he's had he's had a regular redshirt year, injury redshirt. Then you take into account the COVID year, so he still has 3 years to play, as does Beville. Maybe Beville even has 4, given the fact that he has that. He's a sophomore, but he'll still have that extra COVID year. So I think that's good for the maturation and kind of the future of Oklahoma football at the quarterback position. When you look at that, they've got Jackson Arnold coming in the 2023 cycle from a quarterback perspective. So I think it'll make at least me, a lot of Oklahoma fans, feel a little bit better coming into the season, knowing you're always one play away, right, from the backup quarterback playing, and so if that happens, I think people will feel a little bit better about about what that looks like. And Bevel's had an unfortunate situation sitting behind Pickett for as long as he did, for the last couple of years at Pittsburgh, and then obviously this year for the spring under behind Keaton Slovis, and then coming into Oklahoma, understanding that he's behind Dylan Gabriel. So as we talked a little bit about as well, I think Venables was looking for the right fit, not only necessarily the person that's willing to come in knowing that he's probably a backup initially, but also understanding from a character guy, somebody that's actually willing to do that, happy to do that, happy to bet on themselves, so to speak. So I think this will certainly be good for near term, and then as you look into the future with him and Jackson Arnold and Nick Evers, you've got a lot of young talent within the program as well, kind of depending on certainly the season that Oklahoma has, and certainly the season that Dylan Gabriel has individually. Obviously, he could elect to go pro after this year should he have a good enough season, but he does have quite a bit of time left should he choose that. So I think it's something that was needed, and Oklahoma got it pretty quickly in the cycle this summer.
Now, Jason, just to clarify on a few points, so Kenny Pickett, Pittsburgh quarterback, the only quarterback who was selected in the first round of this year's NFL draft, he had opted out.
Yeah.
So he had opted out for the Peach Bowl game against Michigan State. Actually, Nick Patty was his backup and started the game in the Peach Bowl, and he was hurt in the first or second series of the game. He only went 2 for 5, and I watched the game. I'm not going to say that I've got instant recall of how well Davis Beville played, but here we are in a Peach Bowl game against the top 10 opponent, and suddenly you're down to your third string quarterback when you've had a guy that's thrown 40 some touchdown passes and close to 5,000 yards the whole season, and suddenly you're down to your third string quarterback, and they had a lead until extremely late in that game. And by the numbers, again, I don't have recall of the game. I watched it, but didn't take any particular note of it. But 14 of 18 is certainly efficient and effective, if not spectacular or dynamic, for 149 yards. Of course, he probably didn't get many reps leading up to that game as the third string quarterback, or the second string in that case. I do believe I see the one interception and one touchdown. I believe he threw a pretty bad, I can picture that one in my mind, a pretty bad pick late in the game that set up, I think Michigan State had trailed the entire game, scored late to take the lead, and then Pitt had one more gasp and they were coming down the field, and he was leading a drive down the field. It wasn't like 3 and out or threw a pick instantly. He took him 40 or 50 yards. Again, this is all by memory. I can go to the play-by-play. I thought he led them down the field 40 or 50 yards before he threw a pretty bad pick to end the game. But considering the circumstances in a high pressure or high-profile situation, he obviously acquitted himself pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest with you, when he came in for the visit, I started reading about this. I had no idea who the kid was, and so did a little research as well. And now that you're kind of recanting that, Mark, I kind of remember that situation in terms of him being the third string. I don't remember the final drive as you mentioned, but yeah, I'll have to go back and look at that a little bit, look at that tape. But I think, like I said, with all that being said, I think it puts Oklahoma in a much better position from a depth perspective.
Pitt was actually leading that game by as much as 21-10. Michigan State came all the way back, took a 24-21 lead. Yes. I can almost picture the play. It wasn't just a pick to end the game. It was a pick six to kind of put icing on it. 22 seconds left, pick six, 31-21, Michigan State. But it came down to the last drive. And again, 14 of 18 for $150 and a touchdown pass as well. That was a 4-yard touchdown pass. So Davis Beville makes his way in, helps out the depth chart at quarterback. Also, this wide receiver that we had talked about as well, LB Bunkley Shelton out of Arizona State. And obviously by his statistics, he's been on the field and fairly productive.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, Oklahoma's had a couple of visitors from a wide receiver position. And this is what we had talked about, where we felt that Oklahoma would go from a quarterback perspective, a wide receiver perspective, and then wouldn't be at all shocked at some point here. Haven't heard anything if they, from a rush in perspective on the defensive side of the ball. But when you look at that, Mark, yes, LV Bunkley Shelton has a little bit of playing time last year. 33 catches, 418 yards, 2 touchdowns in that Arizona State offense. So all indications said he had a really good visit. He's a little bit more of a kind of a scat back kind of type of wide receiver, 5'11", 195. And so somebody that would work great in Lebby's offense. Lebby seems to have, in every one of his offenses, he seems to have a little bit of a different size kind of makeup, very much like you would on a basketball team, right? You have your point guard that's a little small and shifty, then you have your big man who's kind of tall and lanky and has long arms, and so you've got a couple of those guys that they've brought in. When you look at Marvin Mims and Drake Stoops, that are kind of more kind of scat back guys, and then you also got a guy, Jaden Gibson, who's a little bit taller, a little bit more lanky. So you look at that with him coming in, and then you also have Oklahoma just hosted over the last few days J.J. Hester. J.J. Hester he was a commit from local here in Booker T. Washington High School in Oklahoma, Tulsa area, committed to Missouri, and then he played sparingly, only 4 games, 12 catches, 225 yards, a pair of touchdowns for him as well. But just those 4 games, so he was able to kind of maintain that red shirt year. So he was on a visit, really, really close with Oklahoma commitment Gentry Williams. They've taken a couple of kind of pictures and social media stuff online. So we'll be interested to see if Oklahoma goes at, if they offer both of those kids, and if both of those come. Both, like I said, a little bit different from a body type perspective. When you look at J.J. Hester, he's a little bit of that, more of that lanky guy, 6'3", 210, as opposed to the Shelton is the 5'11" guy. So, but both of those guys will bring much needed depth into that receiving core when you think about everybody that Oklahoma lost, and then Cody Jackson hitting the transfer portal as well.
Talking OU football, and as Lewis Papp reminds everyone, please like the video and share the videos out on social media. So not everyone knows that we're here talking OU each and every Wednesday. So get on out there and let everyone know that you come in contact with on Facebook, Twitter, and elsewhere, that we talk Sooners here every Wednesday with Jason. And we're going to, if we get our guest here at some point, we're going to start a series where we check out all the opponents. So it hit me the other day that we are 12 weeks from August camp across college football. 12 weeks, 12 opponents. Why not bring in some media members from some opponents and get a quick take on their team and how they look to do some early previews of the 2022 season. So we're going to get that hopefully ramped up today. All right. So in addition to that, Jason, 2023 brings in a commit, and it's funny that with all this transfer portal activity, and not just the activity, but the expectation or rumored activity, that it kind of drowns out at times the actual traditional recruiting these days. But Caleb Spencer, a safety out of Virginia, has made his commitment, and he is the fifth commit in the 2023 class.
Yeah, Oklahoma. It's been a while. It's been a little bit since Oklahoma's had a commitment in the 2023 cycle, but I think, Mark, that kind of leans more towards Brent Venables and the recruiting staff's process. I think more so than not having people commit. The way that he envisions it, Brent Venables does not pressure some of these kids to commit early on. Honestly, the way he wants it, he wants them to wait until they are absolutely 100% sure on this is where that they want to be. This is where they feel comfortable. The next 3 to 5 years of their life being here. So he's not willing to take commitments if they're a little bit still waffling. They still want to make other visits. They still want to do this. So it's a little bit of change in the guard, just in terms of how Oklahoma has done, has done in the past. But as you mentioned, Caleb Spencer, he's a 3-star guy. Is not as highly recruited or highly regarded, I guess I should say, as maybe some. But I think he's a perfect mold in that linebacker safety kind of duo, Brent Venables likes to have in his defense. Has some offers from Arkansas and Boston College. Other than that, it's not extremely impressive lineups, but I think it'll be interesting to see what that looks like throughout the year, specifically being committed to Oklahoma. And some kids get more involved in camps towards their junior and senior year, so getting out there. But the 15th ranked player in the state of Virginia, number 52 safety overall, ranked in the country. So as you mentioned, fifth, I think it's the fifth overall commitment in the 2023 cycle for Oklahoma, and you'll start to see that happen a little bit more as the summer. As the summer goes in, because a lot of these kids, there's a good majority that kind of drag it out through their senior years and things like that. But there's still a lot of kids that want to kind of have this in the rearview mirror and kind of focus on their senior year and make that decision early. So I think you'll start seeing some of those, some more of those happen here throughout the summer.
Yeah, we all get caught up in the recruiting rankings, which it makes sense. That's the starting point, is to say, okay, Oklahoma just got to commit from a safety. I do the same thing. The first thing I look at is, where is he ranked? Where is he ranked at his position? What's the overall ranking? What's the ranking within the state? Where does he come from? Okay, Virginia. Virginia's pretty good football playing state, actually. It's not Florida or Texas by any stretch, but it's in the top 10. It's a pretty good football playing state. And then at some point, you just have to trust, especially you're making the connection on the defensive side of the ball with Brent Venables' experience and what he wants. And you just have to trust the coaching staff in the process that, they're not looking. They are looking at recruiting rankings, depending on the coach, depending on the staff. Some of them I've heard take them pretty seriously. Others don't. And then, of course, they gain intel from looking at certain rankings and thinking, okay, why aren't we on this guy? Maybe we should pay some more attention. But aside from that, they go and they watch the game tape. They go through the camps. And for them to get an offer out on somebody like this fairly early in the process, it's not that early, but we're looking at about 7 months to signing day. They must be pretty sold on him and like what they see.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, with the defensive pedigree that this staff has, I think you don't really question that from that perspective as much as maybe you would with some of the previous staff. But so yeah, he's a guy that maybe they just love his size and athletic ability at that safety position, or at that hybrid linebacker safety position. So, yeah, no, I think it's a good get for Oklahoma on the defensive side of the ball, and we'll see how this kind of goes from here.
What might be an interesting exercise to go through, and this might be the time of year to do it, is to start with the 21 class and take a class each week and go through, read off the names, kind of get your impressions, my impressions. Of course, you're going to have much more detailed impressions, but and look at, okay, who bust, who boomed, who pretty much hit the mark. How did this class rank? Is that ranking 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later? Was this class overrated, underrated? And how did this class turn out? Was it supposed to not be a great class and it turned out to be much better, or the other way around? And just kind of review the classes and see how it looks years later.
Yeah, that's a great, like as you mentioned, that's a great thing to do this time of the year, right? When there's a little bit of a lull between spring and fall camp. Yeah, that would be um, interesting look.
All right, there you go, folks. We're going to start our series next week. Jason's given his approval because most of the analysis, as everything else, is going to be mostly on him. I'll give my 2 cents, but we'll start with 2021 and we'll go in reverse. And obviously 21, there's only 1 year to go off, but we'll still get a feel for, okay, this guy made an impact as a freshman. We're still waiting on him. We're still waiting on him. We don't know. Yeah. And just give it a look. And then, of course, there's going to be more validity given to it once we go to 20 and 19 and back. But I think that'll be pretty fascinating to go through the recruiting classes. So we'll start that next week. Unless we are just hammered with news and discussion to talk about. But this would be the time of year that would be best to tackle that. So we start our recruiting class reviews next week with 2021. So we are 16 weeks away from actual football on the field. Oklahoma will tee it up against UTEP in week 1. And we're starting a series where we're looking through opponents. And we're going to start that series right now. We got Steve Helwick on the line from SB Nation. He writes for Underdog Dynasty and Hustle Belt on SB Nation. And Steve, we appreciate you being here today.
Thanks for having me on here. 16 weeks away, can't come soon enough, but really excited just looking at the schedule and seeing football about to happen in the near future.
This guy here knows more about Group of 5 football than anybody I know or have come across. I tell you, you can throw any Group of 5 team his way, and he's going to rip off personnel on both sides of the ball. It's pretty impressive. So Steve has been joining us for a long, long time here at the Voice of College Football. So he was the first guy that came to mind in regards to setting up this series. So UTEP at Oklahoma, week 1, September 3rd. UTEP coming off a pretty nice season considering where this program's been in the last 15 or 20 years at 7-6. Gave Fresno State a heck of a game in their bowl game at the New Mexico Bowl, 31-24. I remember watching that game, and they certainly were in it until the end. And they did not play a Power 5 last season. They played Texas back in 2020. That didn't go too well at 59-3. But, Steve, what does this UTEP team look like coming into 22?
This UTEP team still looks like it has some of the parts from that 2021 team, although a lot of times during the 2021 year, I was thinking that UTEP might have been benefits of a softer schedule as they played a New Mexico State, an FCS team, and New Mexico all in non-conference play before getting a pretty easy CUSA schedule. And they played 3 teams with a winning record before bowl season last year, and all of those were blowout losses. Boise State, they lost by 41. Boise State was just scoring in droves in that first half. And then they lost to UTSA by a handful and to UAB in the season finale. But I think the most impressed I was by UTEP last year was actually their bowl loss to Fresno State. The fact that Fresno State had Jake Haener, they had a full squad in there, and UTEP was able to challenge them on both sides of the ball, held Fresno State to 31 points, which considering that receiving core and quarterback was pretty impressive. And Gavin Hardison had a pretty good game distributing the ball there, had over 300 yards passing, I think, to a handful of different receivers. And although UTEP lost its most important player, Jacob Cowing, to Arizona on the transfer portal this offseason, I still think that they do have some weapons on offense, but losing Cowing is going to be a big one because he was just a threat everywhere, all over the field. He just tons of highlight catches, really good deep threat, and losing him is going to be a big hit for UTEP's offense. But Gavin Hardison, he's the best quarterback we've seen on UTEP's campus since Donovan Portery. Since Trevor Vidito. Portery's New Mexico. I don't know why I always get those two confused. Since Trevor Vidito in the late 2000s. So we're seeing better quarterback numbers than we saw the entire 2010s decade right now from Gavin Hardison. So that's one thing that's kept UTEP afloat. Another thing that's really keeping UTEP in good shape right now is their defensive line. This was a huge weakness of the past with UTEP, but Dana Dimmel has really shored up that unit. Jadrian Taylor and Praise Amawule are probably the best defensive end duo in the entire CUSA. If I pull up the numbers, the number of sacks that the two had combined last year was Taylor had 6.5, Amahule had 5.5, combining for 12 sacks, and UTEP did a really good job of stopping the run. So when you get that duo back, the Miners should be in good shape in the trenches on that side of the ball. So a lot of interesting things to see this year, but this UTEP will have a game before they play Oklahoma since they play week 0 against North Texas. But that Oklahoma game, it's going to be a long shot game, but a good learning experience for these Miners.
Was that Fresno State game an aberration, how well they played against a team that was arguably one of the 25 to 30 best teams in the country?
It felt like it at the time. It was, I do the Bowl Mania on ESPN every year where you rank the Bulls by confidence, and Fresno State was my number 1 confident pick last year. And it was a little shocking in the first half that Fresno State couldn't really pull ahead. I think Silva kicked a field goal right before halftime to give the Bulldogs a 2-point lead. But Fresno State, the fact that they never really pulled ahead in that game and the fact that UTEP was in that game in the fourth quarter just really shocked me. And if you look at the box score of that game, it's not like UTEP really outplayed Fresno State in many areas, which is even more jarring that they kept it close. UTEP was just a good team that game. They didn't benefit off turnovers. They lost a turnover battle in that game. It was just Gavin Hardison did a really good job of picking apart Fresno State's secondary was what I thought was the main factor in that game because UTEP didn't stop the run that well. Jake Haener still got his numbers. He didn't get numbers like he got in the UCLA game or anything last year, but it was and UTEP didn't really have that much pressure on the quarterback either. It was just UTEP just hanging in there in that game. So it felt like an aberration at the time, considering how they played their other quality opponents last year.
You have anything on this one, Jason?
Well, I think it's interesting, Mark, and for a lot of reasons, right? I think there's still a lot of uncertainty on what to expect from Oklahoma coming into this first game. New coordinators on both sides of the ball, new offense, new defense, and just a lot of new coaching, just a lot of newness within the Oklahoma program. So, lacing them up for the first time, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think when there's a certain stigma that comes with playing, a team like UTEP, a team like Kent State coming into from Oklahoma's perspective. But I think you don't have to go any further than last year. Opening game last year, Oklahoma was a very, very heavily favored team over Tulane, and they had to scratch and claw and was in some respects very fortunate to come out with a win. So I think it'll be interesting, and I think as you mentioned here that maybe the strength of the UTEP team is on the defensive line, at least from the defensive side of the ball, which will be a good test for Oklahoma as the offensive line has struggled a little bit over the last couple of years. So having that good test early on, I think will be good just to see where Oklahoma's offensive line is early in the season, based on where they were early in the season last year.
I've got to think the spread on this game is going to be somewhere in the 25 to 30 range. At least. Steve, do you have a projection on, not necessarily this game, but do you have a projection on what type of team we can expect from UTEP? Do you think they'll make it to postseason play again?
Let me pull up the schedule right here. UTEP's they have Oklahoma this year, which is a tougher opponent than they played anytime last year. Also, Boise State on the schedule, so the non-conference is already looking a little tougher this year. But they do get both New Mexico teams. The CUSA schedule has been pretty weak recently, so they have some games in there that they could win in that CUSA schedule. So I think that this team should probably end up around the 5-7 to 6-6 range in the regular season. I said getting your quarterback Gavin Hardison back's big, and also they're going to dominate the trenches against a lot of CUSA offensive lines with the defensive line that they have. But against Oklahoma, you're not going to see any of that on paper. They could enter the game 1-0 with a win over North Texas, who they barely lost to last year on week 0. But I'm excited to watch Dylan Gabriel play football again because he was knocked out of that Louisville game. And Dylan Gabriel throws a better deep ball than I think any quarterback in the country. And he's going to pick apart that UTEP defense. We saw it last year at Boise State. He was spotted a 21-0 deficit at the beginning of the game, and Gabriel just brought them back by just basically going deep on that Boise State team and targeting the boundaries. And he's going to be able to do that with ease probably against this UTEP secondary. So it's going to be fun to watch him again in his opener in a new uniform.
Steve, we appreciate you stopping by, breaking things down, getting our series started. Know your opponents, Oklahoma fans. UTEP's the opponent here. The Miners coming off 7-6 and a close bowl loss against Fresno State. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by. We will see you soon. I've got Steve tagged for a number of these. So, Steve, appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks. Appreciate you for having me on.
It was Steve Helwig from Hustle Belt and Underdog Dynasty to break down some UTEP football for us. Again, 16 weeks away from the matchup at Oklahoma. I don't think anyone's too concerned, but we wanted to get some personnel breakdown there as an early look at this one. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And yes, we have had some moderator type duties needed in the live chat with some spam, some bots jumping in. I've blocked a few, so we will take care of that. And Aaron is letting us know that there are a number of new Oklahoma fans in the chat. That's good news. We like that. So we encourage everyone to continue to bring more and more people in here each and every week. So thanks for being here. All right. And leave those comments and questions. We still have about 20 minutes that we can talk Sooners.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say real quick just about the about the point spread and about the, like I said, when you see a team like UTEP, Oklahoma, I think that a lot of fans and even media for that, to that perspective, just think it's going to be a quick, easy win. But I was just looking this up just to make sure, and I think it's interesting where you had said I would expect the line be between anywhere between 25 and 30. So Oklahoma, when they opened up against Tulane last year, the line 31.5. So, and I know last season was what it was for so many different reasons, right? The coaching situation, I think, played a little bit into that and just in general. But Oklahoma had to scratch and claw their way, and they were a stumble or a tripped quarterback run away from being in real jeopardy of losing that game late in the game. So you never know what's going to happen. Certainly don't expect that this year, at least to that level, right? But given the fact that brand new offense, brand new defense, you expect to a certain extent, Mark, to see some mistakes, to see some blown assignments from time to time on both sides of the ball. So I think it'll be very intriguing to see how that works out. And I think for Oklahoma, from a schedule perspective, I think it works out really well with the first two opponents that they have, with it being UTEP and Kent State, from the perspective of it's a somewhat of a quality non-Power 5 opponent in the fact that it's not an FCS team or it's not a horrible group of 5 team. Both these teams, I believe, I don't remember if Kent State made it to a bowl game last year. I believe
You
they
did.
did.
I believe they played in the conference championship game.
Yeah, that's right. And so having both of those schools before you go travel to Lincoln for your first road game of the year, I think will be good.
I believe Kent State lost the MAC championship game to Northern Illinois. Yes, they did.
Yeah, that's right.
So they made the conference championship game. They lost to Wyoming in the famous Idaho Potato Bowl.
That's right.
So the two opponents, yes, not necessarily at the top of group of 5 play, but to Jason's point, quality, capable teams that are not wowed by playing. They schedule. Kent State went to Texas A&M and Iowa last year and Maryland, so they played 3 pretty decent Power 5 teams non-conference last season. So they're used to playing those kind of opponents. Still overwhelmed athletically and so forth, but in terms of being wowed by the atmosphere and the situation, I would not think that would be the case. And thinking back to that Tulane play, the stumble and the dive for the first down conversion, that was somewhere around midfield. And with me having no investment in the game, I really wanted to see, I wasn't rooting for Tulane, but I wanted to see, 4 downs in the red zone with a chance to win the game, to see who was going to make the plays. And so I was a bit disappointed that the 4th down was not converted just to set up a series in the red zone with the game on the line. I believe Oklahoma only won the game by 5, so a touchdown would have won it for Tulane. So that would have been something else.
It would have been, and I think with everything that happened last year for Oklahoma, just the amount of close calls that they had was just astonishing. This team, obviously it was a little bit down from the last couple of years, didn't make the Big 12 championship game, and obviously not a playoff spot. But when you look at 5-point game against Tulane, 7-point game against Nebraska, 3-point win 16-13 over West Virginia, 6-point win over Kansas State 37-31. The comeback that they had against Texas for the 55-48 win. Even though the Kansas game ended up being 35-23, there was a couple of spots there late in the game where it was really up for grabs. So this team could have very easily have been a 7-5 team as much as they were a 10-2 team. So I think when you think about things like that, Mark, learning, not necessarily that Oklahoma needs to learn how to win, but when you struggle, when you're not playing well, and you still find a way to win games, whether it's a quality opponent or maybe not necessarily a quality opponent, those I think I feel strongly those battles continue to pay dividends throughout the year. Just kind of come in, and maybe those come back this year in terms of hey, we didn't always play well, but we found a way to win even when we weren't playing well. So knowing that kind of winning mentality, hopefully that that helps and makes it maybe a better focus in certain ways. And I think it would be difficult for this team, not only given what they went through last year, but with who the head coach is, not to have focus, I think would be a difficult task to achieve. So I think you'll see a much more focused and different team this year for sure. But I thought that was interesting, kind of going back and looking at all of those close calls that they had, really the first half of the year.
Well, certainly, yes. The Tulane game was a bit of a slap in the face as to, okay, we survived that. Now let's figure out what's wrong with this football team. Once Oklahoma got to that West Virginia game, I think that's really when the heat started to pour onto Spencer Rattler, when they only scored 16 points. And if I recall, his stat line was really good from that game, but they just didn't drive the ball down the field. It was a lot of underneath stuff. West Virginia they too had, I don't remember the scenario, but they as well had a shot to win the game, whether they missed a field goal that would have tied it, or they had some kind of series in Oklahoma's side of the field late in the game. Also, which comes to mind when you bring up Kansas, similar to the Tulane situation, I wasn't rooting against Oklahoma, but I did want to see the scenario if Caleb Williams hadn't made that heads-up play to gain the first down. Yeah, it was 35-23, but it was 28-23 at that point. Kansas gets the ball down 28-23 in decent field position, and who knows? And Kansas, I'm not saying this to in any way try to predict that they're going to be the surprise team of the conference by any stretch. I think we're all going to, by default, pencil them in for 0-9 in the conference. Maybe they squeeze out a win against somebody and go 1-8, probably 2-10 for the season. But they had the Oklahoma performance where they were up by something like 10 points in the second half and only had that, one score deficit with a chance to get the ball back in the closing minutes. Then down the stretch, sure, they had their share of their typical just getting completely annihilated. But late in the season, they went to Texas on the road, beat Texas. TCU and West Virginia were not great teams, but certainly they're far superior to Kansas. And they took them both to a one-score game to close out the season. So they were a much improved team down the stretch. And now we'll see if they can maybe be a little bit better than they typically are and make it difficult on the likes of Texas Tech and TCU and some teams like that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I was just kind of looking back at the, when you look at it, Kansas really did outplay Oklahoma in that game. Had more first downs, had more total yards. To your point, had the 10-0 lead at halftime, had a 17-7 lead in the third quarter, and then it was the 4th down and 1 play that we'd mentioned where Caleb Williams made the very, very heady, intelligent play that he did. So Oklahoma had it 4th and 1 at their own 46, up 28-23 with about 3 minutes and 20 seconds to go. So if he doesn't make that play, Oklahoma hadn't done a really good job at stopping Kansas. I think Jason Bean had his best performance of the year last year against Oklahoma, and so who knows what happens if they don't score. And obviously Oklahoma goes ahead and scores and scores a touchdown late on that drive, with less than a minute to go. But yeah, I think it'll be that's just one example. As you mentioned, the West Virginia game, I think West Virginia turned the ball over around midfield or somewhere in Oklahoma, the early part of Oklahoma territory, and then Gabe Burkich hits a field goal to win the game for Oklahoma. And so I think all of this kind of sets up interesting for a story that I saw come. It's just it's funny. A story that I saw, I think came from CBS Sports, where there was an interview with Caleb Williams, and he talked about how just incredibly uncomfortable and kind of depressed that he was last year early on in the season. Didn't feel like that he had a good enough. He didn't get a fair shot early on. And then you'd kind of mentioned how Spencer Rattler struggled a little bit, obviously in that West Virginia game. Got booed a little bit in that game, obviously, and then he was okay in that game. Within Kansas State, the next week it was actually pretty good, and so I think a lot of people thought, okay, maybe he's turning the corner again, and then we all know what happened with Texas and moving forward. But anyway, Caleb had talked about how awkward of a situation it was, and how tough of a situation it was for him coming in last year, knowing that he felt like he really didn't have a good shot to be that. To be that guy. Wasn't necessarily as open of a competition as he was hopeful. of. He was led to believe, and then obviously as things happened, he got more confidence, and he started doing that. And so it's kind of, I don't know, funny, ironic, weird, whatever adjective you want to use to describe it, that story comes out, and he moves on and plays for the coach that he was a little bit struggling with. So I
Yeah.
thought that was kind of interesting hearing that. I didn't necessarily know a whole lot about that, and I was a little bit shocked to see that, that he was really unhappy early on. I kind of thought coming in he would understand that, with Spencer Rattler being the incumbent, being a Heisman Trophy almost leading candidate coming into the season last year, that obviously wanted to play, but knew that he was the guy, and he'd have to do something pretty special to be to unseat him early on in the season.
Some comments coming in concerning the Nebraska game. That could be an interesting one. Nebraska's improved themselves considerably through the transfer portal. They have the number 1 transfer portal ranking in the Big Ten, and certainly look to have solved their quarterback ills. Not that Adrian Martinez was not a talented player, and of course he's going to be the Kansas State quarterback this year, but always made bad decisions and got careless with the football at the wrong time. And Casey Thompson, I think, is, from a passing standpoint, a significant upgrade. And they got the TCU defensive end, O'Shawn Mathis, as well, who's been second team All Big 12 the last 3 seasons and had a 9-sack season 2 years ago to help the pass rush. So going on the road this time to Nebraska could be interesting. And then few people are noting the Texas game. Apparently very early odds and point spreads have Texas as being favored over Oklahoma. My goodness, Texas. Steve Dace, he has a Michigan podcast. He does a team total team ranking based on talent. It's a pretty good metric, but I just have to challenge the Texas. We delivered that podcast yesterday, and I took his Texas ranking of, I think, 6th, and I think they're 6th in the FPI. And not to misinform anyone about Steve's ranking, he's not saying Texas is the 6th best team in the country. It's a talent ranking, but my goodness, I just I don't know. They have been just so underachieving for so long. It's just perplexing to me that there are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of teams across America that have multiple players drafted in the NFL draft. And for the second time in 8 years, they don't have anyone drafted after compiling top 10 after top 10 after top 5 after top 10 recruiting classes. That almost would seem impossible that you wouldn't have players drafted, and you would lose to Kansas and you would go 5-7, and it's just I don't know what's going to have to happen there.
It's like clockwork, Mark. Almost every single year, no matter what happens the year before, you can bank on this team being top 25 preseason. I would be shocked if they're not. You can bank on what we're seeing right now with whether it's the FPI or whatever it is, whether it's talent rankings ahead, whatever the ranking is. You can bet Texas is always going to be part of that conversation, and part obviously to your point, part of it's because of the talent that they bring in recruiting class each and every year, and even some of the years that they haven't had as great of a recruiting class by Texas standards, and this past year they had a really good recruiting class, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's like I said, it's one of those anomalies in college football. It's going to be every single year. That they're going to be, no matter what happened the year before. Like, how many 5-7 teams would you see, unless they had a catastrophic roster turnover for the positive, that'll be ranked. And I may be wrong. They may not be ranked preseason by the AP or the coaches or whatever, but I would think that they're probably in that anywhere in that 20 to 25 range, given what they've had, what's happened in the past. And so, but I think to your previous point, Mark, about Nebraska, was, yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be this Nebraska team, I think, looking on paper, probably looks like a better team than they were a year ago, with, as you mentioned, with the addition of Casey Thompson, with the addition of O'Shawn Mathis on the defensive side. I think I saw something although that was on the Texas side, never mind. But I think there was Casey Thompson's probably a much better. I don't say much better. He's a better quarterback in my opinion than Adrian Martinez. But more so with Nebraska than anything, that team needs to learn. Once they learn how to win some games, once they figure out how to win some close games, I think you'll start to see them turn that around. Hopefully, maybe it's past that starts happening in conference season as opposed to non-conference season. But
they're another version of Texas.
Yeah, they're close. Yeah, I mean, I think they don't have probably as much talent as Texas does, but still in every single game. And I think I was looking number 13 overall in the transfer portal rankings, as you mentioned, top in the Big Ten. So they got a chance to be in that to be pretty good. And I think that'll be honestly, Mark, I think that'll be one of the tougher games for Oklahoma this year. Probably top 3, top 4, and overall toughness kind of coming into the season. I mean, when you look at, probably for me, when you look at Baylor, Texas, Oklahoma State, and probably this game, you could point to Iowa State a little bit. I think the spot that Oklahoma plays Iowa State in this year is a little tougher than maybe necessarily than the game itself. I believe they play on the Thursday night in Ames before Halloween. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it'll be a really good test for Oklahoma to end their non-conference.
Oklahoma Sooners live for a 57th time. We appreciate everybody being here, leaving your comments and questions. And of course, we've got the most people online that we've had the entire hour. So that's pretty typical. So wait for the video to post, and you can watch it in its entirety. Watch what you missed here in just a few minutes. Make it on back here next Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 where it counts, 11:30 a.m. Central there in Oklahoma. And again, please subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live, because at times we need to switch the start time. But appreciate everybody being here. Bring some Oklahoma fans with you, college football fans in general, with you next week. Jason, we appreciate you making this work each and every week.
No problem, Mark. Thanks for having me as always.